Wa, wa. Welcome to our Morning Star, an exhibition commemorating 60 years of resistance, unity, struggles, and our quest for freedom and independence for West Papua. I'm to have a West Papuan leader who lives in the Netherlands. She's the daughter of the late Bernard Tangama, who was also a well-known West Papuan leader. Leonie has served as an executive of the United Liberation Movement for West Papua, and she continues to fight for her people's right to self-determination in the parent organization, the Free Papua Movement, OPM. Welcome, Susa Leonie.
Thank you so much for having me, Joey. Thank you, Young Solwara, Pacific. Thank you so much for always being with us and giving us all your support throughout all these years. Thank you.
Thank you. Then we'll get straight into this. And if you, like you've had in the introduction, a reference to your late father, who was a well-known West Papuan leader who stood up for his people, and you continue his people's legacy of leading the cause for justice and freedom for West Papua. Can you take me back to your earliest engagement in the movement?
I could talk about the earliest engagement in any of my family, because my family's history is very much intertwined with that of the movement, and also with that of the 1st of December 1961. Which starts really with my uncle, Nicolas Tangahma, who was one of the elected members of a parliament that was set up at the time when the Dutch was the colonizer. It was called the New Guinea Council, New Guinea Raad. And he was one of the parliamentarians in this parliament that was set up on the 5th of April. And the objective or the aim of that parliament was to voice the wishes of the Papuan people to basically become an independent nation among other independent and sovereign nations. And it was obvious that that was going to happen because preparations were well on the way, and the Dutch had also agreed to do that. So on the 5th of April, this parliament came, and then on the as it became more and more real, another nation just across, called Indonesia, which had just gained its independence, didn't agree. They wanted to actually incorporate West Papua into their own country. They wanted to colonize it. They should have known better, because they themselves had fought for their independence, but they went with the colonizing mind to take over. And so a conflict started between the Dutch and the Indonesians. And the Papuan leaders at the time, including my uncle, Nicolas Tangahma, felt that they needed to quickly do something to stop and to make sure that people knew around the world that West Papua wanted to be independent. They wrote a manifesto on the 19th of October of that same year, 1961, demanding that the colonizer at the time, the Dutch, would start recognizing some national symbols so that it would prepare a state. We call it an embryo state, because it was the beginning of something. It wasn't reality yet. My father was actually in the Netherlands at the time studying, because there was a group of young men and women who had been sent overseas to study, to prepare for that independent West Papua, and he was part of it. Very soon, the Dutch then recognized our flag, our national anthem, our name, which was West Papua, and the name of our people, the Papuan people, which constituted the basis at the beginning, the very beginning of what we would call the beginning of statehood. It was an embryo. It wasn't recognized formally by the United Nations, but it was recognized by the Dutch.
Yeah, you draw me clearly back to your family's leadership, your uncle, and then your father, and here you are leading this fight for justice from the Netherlands. Leonie, what inspires you to continue this fight for West Papua?
There are many people who go into the struggle and they do it by choice because they realize at a very young age that they need to do something. In other cases, you basically grow up with it. So I basically grew up with it. So it's practically almost natural to join in, to do what you can, to use your talents to do this. For my father, also, it was the same. What happened was he was supposed to just study and then go back to an independent West Papua and then straight away. But his brother, who attended and who saw with his own eyes what was happening in those years, and who also was a witness to what happened in 1969, which was that fraudulent vote, which was then taken note of by the United Nations. He told basically to my father to stay outside because they knew they would need Papuans outside. Melanesians, from what I understand, we don't move outside. We're okay in Melanesia. I think West Papuans are one of the very few people who actually have this huge community in diaspora. We have about 1,500 Papuans who live in the Netherlands, about 20 to 50,000, I think 50,000 in Papua New Guinea, just across the border. About 300, between 300 and 400 in Australia. And indeed, we grow up knowing that our people need us. So what happened was my father died rather young. At the time I was 16. And in the Netherlands, I had actually grown up in Senegal, where my father had done a lot of lobbying. I basically grew up in Africa, which is one of the continents that the struggle took us to. And it was a great adventure, I would say, a great risk also. I mean, he took his family and moved us to Africa so that he could talk to the African presidents, the African brothers and sisters who were there, let them know about Black people living in the Pacific who were colonized by the capitalist forces, basically, who were out for the gold and all the riches that are underneath, that are on the land and underneath the land of West Papua. So we grew up in Africa and then went back to the Netherlands. And in those days, the struggle was just went on, generation after generation. You carry on the torch. I had the honor to also have the guidance of one of our leaders, who was Victor Kashepo, the late Victor Kashepo, who is well known in the indigenous movements, but also in the Pacific. He spent a couple of years in Fiji, and he was the one who inspired us to go on. And who guided us as well. And then he passed away as well. But there's a lot of people, so you just need to go on, really. What I did was also, because of our close cooperation with human rights organizations in West Papua, we were able to specialize in that field because you need to know what you're talking about so that you can report to the United Nations about what's going on. It is practically obvious after a couple of years that they know what's going on, but it just needs to be in those reports so that they cannot say at the end, well, we didn't actually know what was going on, but it's there.
Yeah, I like how you say the leadership had transitioned, or was rather the torch was passed on from, the generation of your fathers and your uncles to your current generation. And I think, the passing of that torch is quite important in terms of leading this movement. Leonie, as a West Papuan leader, how would you describe the contributions and the important role our West Papuan women have played and continue to play in this movement?
It's a tremendous role. I can't really think of any time when the women have not been involved in the struggle. From the beginning, they've had to endure the suffering of what the colonizer inflicted upon us. The women are the strongest, as we know, element of society, and that is where a colonizer will hit the strongest as well, the women and the children. But at the very beginning as well, when we started talking about this New Guinea Council, there was already a woman representing the West Papuan already in April 1961. Her name was Dorcas Tokoro Hanasbey. She was the only woman member of the New Guinea Council, and she had political power, political authority, and a lot of knowledge about the family structure and how things went in her own environment, but also about medicinal plants. So she had this sort of wisdom about her, which I think gave her strength to be the only woman with all these men having been chosen in this embryo of a parliament in 1961. I'd like to talk about another two women who have put their life basically on the line for the West Papuan cause. There's the second one is Mama Josephine Gewap. She decided to take part in activities of flag raisings in West Papua itself in the 80s, where it was very risky for them to do so, but she decided to do that anyway. She actually made a flag, and in 1982 they rose that flag and flew it in front of the Parliament building, the regional parliament, the regional assembly, and of course immediately got arrested, sent to prison. She was a teacher also, and she chose to do this because it means something, and the flag means something. It's beautiful how it's hanging or how it's depicted on the wall. So the price to pay is to go to prison, but the inspiration that the young draw from it is even greater, and because you share the sense of purpose and also the compassion, the faith, and the love of your country. So that stays forever. She passed away last year, unfortunately. The third woman I'd like to talk about is Mama Josefa. I think you've met her, Joey. She's always been with us when we would lobby at the MSG in the Pacific countries, and she is very active, traveling around the world, and she is basically a symbol of what our fight is. She looks very fragile, and yet she is very, very strong. And also the fact that the land that she lives on is basically the land of the Amungme people, where the biggest gold company in the world operates. So the stakes are high, they're huge, and yet Mama Josefa decides very early on to just fight and to say, well, to defend her people. And to promote the traditional culture and to make sure that the indigenous people are listened to, are heard. And she pays the price as well, where she's locked up in prison. And not only in prison, but also in those days near the company, it was basically a container where she was locked up for weeks on. Left with 2 or 3 other women and beaten as well. So it's through these three women to whom I want to pay tribute, that I wanted to tell the story of the women who, the West Papuan women who continue, who persevere, who sometimes ask literally, why would I go on having the children? My children are being killed by the Indonesians. This has no meaning. It has to stop. So the hurt is there, but the perseverance and the love for the people is there as well. So that's
yeah, thank you, Leonie. And we, acknowledge the leadership of these three very strong women. I was very privileged to meet Mama Yosipa, who I had an opportunity to speak to, and yeah, she is one of those very strong women, and also acknowledging the many stronger women who back in West Papua who are also currently at the forefront of the movement as we speak. Leonie, this year marks a very special, it commemorates 60 years of when the Morning Star were first raised. Also, it could be looked at as 60 years of Indonesia's colonization of West Papua, 66 decades rather of human rights abuse and violence on West Papuans. And I think the question that many would be asking is how much longer can the world be silent or ignorant on West Papua?
It's a tough question because for 60 years they have kept silent. For 60 years they've decided to cover it up. But what they didn't expect was that in the 80s, 90s, this thing called the internet would come. That things like Facebook would appear, where those who want to keep others silent can no longer really do that. And so in the last decade, we've seen the young ones actually opening their eyes and witnessing what was happening in West Papua through the pictures, through the videos that were posted, through the short stories about it. At first, it's just pictures and such, and then explanations about what is going on. And so through the pressure of the people who saw these images, the governments, the parliamentarians have to start talking, and they have to start acknowledging what is happening. For a while there's been the status quo seemed to be going back to normal. I mean, people are basically wanting to ignore it. But you do see the change now in the political situation in the world today. The powers that are starting to crumble in certain region, other powers wanting to have a say in what is happening, no longer following the West. So it might cause changes. We see that already in Africa, where, for example, in many many French-speaking countries in Africa, they're actually literally chasing the French away from their regions. So it's something that is going to start at some stage to be uncovered. So it's been 60 years. For us, we see it more as a celebration because it was something that was ours. It was something that we decided, as opposed to other things such as that fake referendum that happened in 1969 or that so-called New York agreement between the Indonesians and the Dutch, where they decided things on our behalf. No, in this particular case, it was something that was ours. In the same way that 10 years later, on the 1st of July, 1971, there was a proclamation of independence made in the jungle on liberated territory to explain to the world that we are free and we demand to be recognized, despite all the conspiracies that happened in the 60s.
You mentioned, in the past decade or two, increasingly young people are involved. And, what's being shared now on social media or through the internet is something that is becoming mainstream in terms of raising awareness. And for us here in the Pacific, since the year 2000, the issue of West Papua's right to self-determination and our Pacific leaders' concerns of Indonesia's human rights abuse and violations of West Papua has been on the Pacific agenda. What's your call on our Pacific leaders, given at some point we've seen that it has, the issue of West Papua has fallen off the Pacific agenda?
The struggle comes indeed with ups and downs throughout history. You see that at certain moments you get very promising results, like the time we became actually observers of the Melanesian Spirit Group. That was a great result, a great cooperation among Papuans and leaders of Melanesia, and leaders and the civil society of Melanesia and the youth of Melanesia and the churches. But at other times you see it slip away when the enemy basically does its own lobbying and makes sure that they take you off the agenda. And that is always something that we need to be vigilant of. For the Papuan, for not the Papuan leaders, but the leaders in the Pacific, that's it's something that they will need to decide for themselves, for their region. We're dealing with a new generation of leaders. We're dealing also with leaders that understand what is going on and are maybe a little bit more free than before in terms of being colonized or neo-colonized by the former colonizers. We see, for example, something in Papua New Guinea that hasn't happened before. Civil society, but also some members of parliament and governors talking for West Papua. That was unheard of in the 70s and 80s. That was something that my father, for example, would have, I think if he sees it, or maybe he saw it from up there, he would have thought, wow, that is something that's quite new. So Papua New Guinea, which is the other giant in the region, needs to take its responsibility as well as the other half of New Guinea. And I'd just like to quote the Black political philosopher Frantz Fanon from Martinique. He said, each generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it. So it's up to the leaders of the Pacific to discover their mission in terms of solidarity towards us and solidarity towards the Pacific, or to make the Pacific this great region, and to fulfill that mission or to betray it. Is this really what the founding fathers of each of these nations wanted when they built their each respective nations that became independent afterwards, except for West Papua and Kanaki and French Polynesia. So it's, yeah.
Thank you, Leonie. And unfortunately, it takes me to my last question. The Morning Star remains a symbol for unity and for West Papuans, but for us in the Pacific, as a sign of, or a symbol for resistance towards Indonesia's ongoing colonization. And as we commemorate 60 years of resistance, right, like you said, we celebrate. We also remember those that have gone before us in this fight for justice and freedom for West Papua. Any final comments from you?
The fight will go on. It's been 60 years, so it was a span of 2 or even 3 generations that have continued the fight. The Pacific will need to build itself, to rebuild itself. And in order to do that, it needs to go back to what the founding fathers of each of these nations, as I just said, intended for this Pacific to be. If they intended it to be a region which is free of colonization and free of other scourges such as nuclear testing and environmental degradation, then we need to take on the fight and fight it. And it's in our hands. We are the only ones who can do this. The ones who come after us might not have enough time or enough people. In terms of West Papua, it's physically, demographically, a number of people. We will be too less. No, we will not be enough to do this. In terms of other regions in the Pacific, it's about land that is being swallowed by the sea. If after a number of years, there will not be enough land to do this. So it's really where we're at a crucial point where we need to do this, and we need to do it properly for the next generations.
Mm. A message for our West Papuans as we commemorate 60.
That would be nice if I could read the text of the manifesto, which basically was the beginning of or the reason for what happened on the 1st of December 1961, when the Dutch officially recognized our flag, our national anthem. If I could do this in Malay and say my greetings to my people. Selamat Hari Nasional 1 Desember 2021. Izinkan saya manifest. Kami yang bertanda tangan di bawah ini, penduduk tanah Papua bagian barat, terdiri dari berbagai golongan, suku dan agama, merasa terikat bersatu padu sebagai satu bangsa dan satu tanah air, menyatakan kepada penduduk sebangsa dan setanah air bahwa 1. Berdasarkan pasal 73 Piagam Perserikatan Bangsa-Bangsa bagian A dan B. 2. Berdasarkan maklumat akan kemerdekaan bagi daerah-daerah dan bangsa-bangsa yang belum terperintah sendiri sebagai termuat dalam resolusi yang diterima oleh sidang pleno Perserikatan Bangsa-Bangsa dalam sidang yang ke-15 dari 20 September 1960 sampai 20 Desember 1960 nomor 1514. 3. Berdasarkan hak mutlak dari kita penduduk tanah Papua bahagian barat atas tanah air kita. 4. Berdasarkan hasrat dan keinginan bangsa kita akan kemerdekaan kita sendiri, maka kami dengan perantaraan Komite Nasional dan Badan Perwakilan Rakyat kita New Guinea mendorong Gubernmen Nederlands New Guinea dan pemerintah Nederlands supaya mulai dari 1 November 61 A. Bendera kami dikibarkan di samping bendera Nederland. B. Nyanyian kebangsaan kami, Hai Tanahku Papua, dinyanyikan atau dilakukan di samping Wilhelmus. C. Nama tanah kami menjadi Papua Barat. Dan D. Nama bangsa kami menjadi Papua. Atas dasar-dasar ini, kami bangsa Papua menuntut untuk mendapat tempat kami sendiri, sama seperti bangsa-bangsa merdeka, dan di antara bangsa-bangsa itu kami, bangsa Papua, ingin hidup sentosa dan turut memeliharakan perdamaian dunia. Dengan manifest ini, kami mengundang semua penduduk yang mencintai tanah air dan bangsa kita Papua menyetujui manifest ini dan mempertahankannya. Oleh karena inilah satu-satunya dasar kemerdekaan bagi kita bangsa Papua. Hollandia, 19 Oktober 1961.
Thank you. Nina, I just want to thank you for being part of this exhibition and thank you for your leadership. Tangi Tomas, Vinaka, terima kasih.
Thank you. Terima kasih.